Ninja Leaders Podcast, episode number 27.
Welcome to the Ninja Leaders Podcast, taking you and your student organization to the next level. And now, your host, Nick Palkowski.
Well, hello and welcome to this week's episode of the podcast. I am so glad you could join us because I am very excited for our guest here today on this episode. We are going to be talking to Paul Moya. Paul is a successful entrepreneur, speaker who has inspired innovative thought and positive change in corporate and leadership sectors all over the globe. His sterling reputation in leadership and the business world is credited for playing a vital role in creating success and opportunities for corporations and individuals alike. And I am very excited to be talking to Paul because he is actually a friend of mine. He's someone I first met about 4 years ago when he ran for National FFA office and was later elected as the president of the National FFA Organization, an organization which has over 500,000 members. So we are going to be diving deep into what it is like to actually lead an organization like that. What's it like to be a student leader at that level, and some of the insights that he has gained throughout his time as a student leader, as an officer in the FFA, as well as in his other leadership experiences. So let's dive right into our interview with Paul. Paul, I just want to thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the podcast.
Nick, thanks so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Well, and Paul, I already gave our listeners a quick little introduction of who you are, but I wanted to give you the chance to kind of introduce yourself. So who is Paul Moya?
Well, thanks for doing that, Nick. I'm a next generation consultant and speaker. I work to bridge the gap between those with the experience and those with the potential. Basically, what that means is I help companies understand how they can recruit, retain, and motivate Gen Y and millennial employees, and how they can sell to Gen Y and next generation consumers. I also work with college students to help them prepare for the workplace, provide them with tools, resources. That way they can have a leg up in the very competitive job market as they enter it. A few years back, I was educated at Notre Dame and Harvard, and I've served in a variety of leadership roles. Most notably, I served as the 2008-2009 National FFA president and also as the Student Government Association president while I was studying at Harvard.
Awesome, Paul. And before we dive too deep into everything, I just want to make sure that everyone understands what we're talking about. So when you mention Gen Y, what is exactly a Gen Y student, or who is a Gen Y person?
So different groups define it by a different set of dates, but mostly it's anybody that's born in the late 80s to around the 2000 mark. So they've actually divided the group into two segments. One, that the older members of that segment they call Gen Yers, and the younger members of that segment, those born closer to the year 2000, they call millennials.
Okay. Good to know. Good to know. And we're going to be definitely diving deep into a lot of what you do now as a speaker, as a consultant. But before we get into that, and I just wanted to start off these podcasts with a little success quote. So, Paul, do you have a favorite success quote?
I do, Nick. One that I apply to my life and really live by each day is it's very simple. To whom much is given, much is expected. It's obviously a very commonplace version of Luke 12, verses 48. But to me, it's a reminder that leadership is a responsibility and an opportunity to do so much good for others.
And Paul, take us down to the ground level. How has this actually shown up in your life? Can you give us an example when this actually played out, or when you used this quote to really influence your life?
Sure, Nick. I mean, leadership is a responsibility. It's stressful, it's challenging, and requires sacrifice. I think there is a huge difference between having a title and actually being a leader. And too often I find that people enter leadership for the fame or the glory or the power, and not remembering what this is really about. And so the way I use it, especially when I was various leadership roles. So I can talk about when I was National FFA president. It was a stressful role. There were, over 500,000 students. I was on the road 330 days out of the year, traveling 100,000 miles. And so you could imagine how stressful and challenging that role was. But at the end of each day, when I had 15 emails left in the inbox and it was 12:30 that night, or I had to get up really early and do a workshop, or I was meeting with a member of Congress, even on the days where I didn't feel I had energy, or even on the days that it was easier to take a shortcut or to find an easy way to go around the problem, I reminded myself that this really is an opportunity. And because of that, we have an obligation to those that we serve. And so it was something that constantly kept me motivated on the days that I wanted to call it quits early, and something that still to this day I use.
Oh, that's awesome. And so, Paul, you kind of already started to mention some of your involvement in student organizations, but why don't you tell us a little bit more about how you were involved in student organizations, at what level, or how did you even start to get involved in the FFA, for example?
Sure. I think my first involvement in an organization started when I was about 9 years old. I joined 4-H. I grew up on a family farm about 30 minutes south of Albuquerque, New Mexico. My dad was actually an FFA advisor, and I had an older brother and older sister who were both in 4-H and FFA. And so by the time I got into high school, I had really been around the organization for many years. I joined the Ag 1 leadership class at my high school, and kind of the rest is history from there. But I took it as an opportunity on that first day of ag class to start getting involved. I think 2 weeks later, I went to my first leadership conference, and that really served as the motivation and the springboard for me to continue growing into various roles in the National FFA organization.
And what was it really about the FFA that kind of drew you in, that really made you want to be involved in that organization? Do you remember what it was?
That's a good question. As I think back, what I loved so much about the FFA was that it had a place for everyone. I grew up in a very diverse community, and our school was about 2,500 students. And I just remember that FFA, whether somebody was into sports or they were into livestock shows or whether they were into academic competitions, they could really get involved in the National FFA organization. It gave them a place of belonging, and it gave them a place to have pride. And I think it's certainly in today's day and age, students need that sense of community and that sense of being a part of something that's much greater than themselves. And for me, that was really it, knowing that every time I went to a state convention and being surrounded by hundreds of FFA members, or going to national convention where there were thousands, knowing that I could be a part of something much greater than I was, but that I could somehow play a role in it to make a difference in the lives of other students was really the tipping point for me.
And Paul, in this episode of the podcast, we really want to talk about kind of your journey through a student organization, the FFA specifically, but how you as a leader kind of grew in this organization and now what you're doing afterwards. So Paul, is there any specific accomplishment or major achievement that you are very proud of?
Well, when we talk about the National FFA organization, I think the thing that first comes to mind is when I had the opportunity in 2008 to serve as the National FFA president. But it certainly didn't start there. My love for the organization started Green Hand Year, and so when you ask about a journey, the journey was paved with up and downs. Sometimes it was a rocky road. I specifically remember my freshman year of high school in the FFA. For those of you who aren't familiar, they have many chapters have what are called Green Hand FFA officers. So those are first year FFA officers. And I ran for president, and I didn't get elected, and ran for vice president, didn't get elected, ran for secretary and treasurer. And I ended up running for every office until the last office, which was Sentinel. And I think finally people elected me to that role because they either felt sorry for me or they appreciated my determination. So I served that first year as Sentinel, and then I had the chance to serve as chapter Sentinel the year after, and vice president and president and district officers. And then I ran for state office. And so my senior year of high school, I served as state vice president. And then the year after I graduated, I ran for state office a second time because in New Mexico, you're allowed to do that. But then I ran for national office my first year of college, and I wasn't elected. And that was part of the journey, and that was something that I had to overcome until I finally reached that pinnacle and that peak and the greatest experience in my life, and that was serving as National FFA president. And so I tell you that journey to remind your listeners, Nick, that I think sometimes, it's certainly when I was a younger FFA member, I always saw these national officers or state officers and thought that their journey to get where they were was perfect, and that they didn't have any failures along the way. But I say that to remind your listeners that failure is a huge part of it. And quite frankly, I think I was a better officer, and I had hopefully a broader and larger impact because of what I had learned through those failures.
Well, and let's really dive into that side of the journey a little bit more. Let's talk a little bit more about some of those failures that you had. If you want to pick maybe one or two specific ones that kind of come to mind, and maybe dive in, let us know what happened and then how you kind of overcame that failure and how you were able to use that in order to lead the organization.
Sure, Nick. As I mentioned, I ran for national office in 2007. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the process for national office, you go through 9 rounds of interviews over 6 days. Each state gets to send one candidate. And throughout the week, there are about 19,000 data points that those candidates are scored on. And then at the end of it, they pick 6 national officers. Well, I made it into the finals, and I remember standing with the other candidates as they were announcing the 6 national officers, and they quickly went through them, and my name wasn't one of them. And so I had been preparing for months for those interviews and had been looking forward to this event for years. Ever since I joined the FFA, I think I had been dreaming of the day that I would have the opportunity to serve as a national officer. But when I wasn't elected, it reminded me of something, and I'll link it back to the success quote that I said at the beginning, and that's to whom much is given, much is expected, and that is that leadership is a responsibility. It's not about us, it's about others, and it's about what we can do for others. And it reminded me that this wasn't about me. I certainly felt like, ending the journey and ending the path, quitting, giving up. But I remember one day I just asked myself, who is this about? Is it about me, or is it about those that I think I can truly make a difference in their lives? And that's something that I think all of us have to think about as leaders, is if we truly believe that we can make a difference in the lives of others, if we truly believe that we can add value to a team or to an organization, or somehow we can inspire those who will follow us, then we not only should step up, even after failure, even after we've fallen down, but we actually have a responsibility to step up again. And that responsibility is what really pushed me to overcome that failure, because it was a reminder that I owed it to the members of the organization, because I did believe that I could make a difference in their lives.
I think that's a very powerful lesson that you're talking about right there, that responsibility that we have as student leaders. So, Paul, do you have any suggestions for some of our younger members, or maybe our newer officers, on how they can actually go through and handle some of those major responsibilities that they will have as a student leader?
Sure. I think first and foremost, my suggestion for anybody who's a student leader is have a planner, have a to-do list. I remember when I was a younger FFA member, when I was early in high school, I would just remember everything. I would remember all my assignments. I would remember everything I had to do for a leadership conference. I would remember all my roles and responsibilities and deadlines as an officer. But at some point, it just becomes too much. At some point, you'll forget something. And it's only going to take you one time to forget something really important where you impact somebody else's life in a very negative way to learn that you can't do it all just by remembering everything. And so one of the easiest and most practical tools that you can use as a student leader to stay focused on everything you have to do and to be able to accomplish what you need to is to have whether it's a small notebook that you slide in your back pocket that you put your daily to-do list on, or it's a planner that you keep in your backpack. Have something to write down those deadlines and responsibilities. And as you go throughout the day, cross off those to-do lists. And for me, it's kind of a sense of accomplishment at the end of the day to be able to go to bed and to rest knowing that I've accomplished everything I needed to for that day.
Oh, I totally agree. And that's something that we talk a lot here on the podcast, is actually about managing your time, managing tasks. So, Paul, I just want to get kind of real tactical. What do you use right now, or what is your system in terms of task management?
Well, as I suggested, the most basic thing I use is a to-do list. I create the to-do list. In fact, before I go to bed each night, hopefully the to-do list for that day is all crossed out. But I make the to-do list for the next day. That way I can fall asleep without thinking about it, without having it on my mind. I put down, sometimes it's 3 tasks, sometimes it's 10 tasks. And then I rank them in terms of priority. And the first 3 tasks I put on that are 3 tasks that I know I cannot go to bed the next night without accomplishing. So I make sure I rank those. And then I have just a simple planner. It's nothing special, but I have a written planner and then a planner that I keep in my phone and on my computer with all the important deadlines. With that, I also use a system that I call reverse planning. And so let me give you an example. Say on January 1st, I have some big project due. Say I have a budget deadline for the student org I'm involved in, or say I have a proposal for a leadership workshop that I'm going to be presenting. Well, if January 1st is the deadline, I make deadlines prior to that. So on December 15th, I'll make another deadline that says I have to have my outline completed for my workshop. Or maybe by December 1st is another deadline where I say I have to have my topic idea narrowed down to 3 topics. And by setting deadlines along the way, it's much easier. You know, they say, how do you eat an elephant? 1 bite at a time. And so if you make small deadlines along the way, it makes big tasks much more manageable.
Oh, yeah, and I think that's a great strategy. It's one I use all the time. I know that reverse planning, I think that's kind of almost that way you have to tackle some of those big projects. So that's definitely an excellent suggestion. So, Paul, what are some of the other habits that kind of helped lead to your success?
I think something else that I tell student leaders all the time is write down your goals. It sounds so simple, but it makes a huge impact. Years ago, I started what I called 90-day goals. And what that is, one of my mentors actually, he did it, and he's done it throughout his career, and he inspired me to do the same thing. So in 90-day goals, every 90 days, I make 3 personal and 3 professional goals. Now, the way you should structure it, or certainly the way that I was advised to structure it, is that to make 3 personal goals that you don't share with anybody, that are so personal to you and what you stand for, and areas about yourself that you want to work on, that you don't have to share them with anybody. But your 3 professional goals, so maybe those are, create a new keynote for some leadership conference in your organization, or have a weekly officer meeting, or whatever your professional goal is, make sure you have accountability partners for those. That way you can ask somebody to keep you on track, so that if you're getting behind and you're not focused, or you're not where you need to be, or you're procrastinating, somebody could say, hey, Paul, how's that new keynote that you're planning going? And that way, if you're not on point and you're not where you need to be, they can push you and they can remind you to be on point. And then at the end of every 90 days, I evaluate how effective I was at accomplishing those goals. And then I make 3 more professional and 3 more personal goals. So you basically break the year into quarters, and you have 6 goals each quarter.
Oh, that's awesome. So how do you actually go about finding your accountability partners, or do you have some sort of system kind of set up on how that interaction with your accountability partner should actually work?
Sure. So something very simple that I do. So as I mentioned, the personal goals are things that should be so personal to you that you don't share them with anybody else, because quite often if we make a goal and we know we're sharing it with somebody else, we may not get as personal as we need to, or we may not be as specific as what is ideal for that goal. But on the 3 professional goals, I share those with an accountability partner. And sometimes those goals are different. So sometimes those accountability partners are different. Let me explain. So if in in the next 90 days, I have something that's very specific to my speaking business. I might share that, or I will share that with an accountability partner who's also involved in keynote and leadership speaking, or who's also involved in business consulting, because they can not only keep me on track, but they can provide advice along the way when I need it. Now, if in the next 90 days, I have 3 professional goals that are in a completely different area of my life, I find a friend, I find a mentor, I find a business associate that is aware and able to give advice in that area, and I ask them to be my accountability partner. It doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out process or super formal. You just ask somebody, hey, will you be my accountability partner? I have 3 really important goals that I would like to achieve in the next 90 days. And I know, and research has shown, that if you have an accountability partner, you're much more likely to accomplish those goals. Would you be willing to do that for me? And in return, if you make goals for the next 90 days, I will also do the same for you.
Oh, and I really like the fact that you are looking for someone who is kind of in that same area, either going to the same spot or has experience with that specific goal, because it's almost like you're getting kind of a 2-for-1. You're almost kind of getting a coach or someone extra there, kind of almost like an extra cheerleader that can actually give you advice along the way as well. So I think that I like that touch.
Yeah, it works really well. And the best way actually to find those mentors, accountability partners, all the accountability partners I have are people from my mentor network. And what my mentor network is basically just a list of mentors in my life, a list of people in my life who I have approached, and I've asked them to be my mentor. I've asked them, initially I approach that and say, for the next 6 months, I'd really like to grow in these areas, and I know that you would be an incredible resource and could provide a great amount of insight in these areas that I would like to grow. Would you be willing to meet with me once a month for the next 6 months, or once every 6 weeks for the next 6 months, to have coffee or lunch and to be my mentor? And then we can reevaluate in 6 months. Usually those work out well, and you keep doing them for years and years. But I want to also make it clear that you shouldn't just have mentors that are older than you, or you shouldn't just have mentors that are, professors or teachers or people who have been in your career longer than you have. It's important to have the mentors that are, I think of it as up, down, and sideways. So people who are older than you, more senior, but people who are younger than you, and then people who are your peers. And then later on, you can go back to those mentors to be your accountability partner.
Oh, that's awesome. And I'm so glad you brought up that mentor network, because I think that is huge. And I think it kind of disproves a common myth almost among, when you think about mentors, everyone thinks that you only have one mentor in your life. But as you're saying, as you're telling us about your network, you have multiple mentors. So Paul, is there any way that you decide what areas you should get people to mentor you in?
Well, I think the easiest place to start is to find people who you are inspired by, or who you want to be more like. So if that's a teacher or a coach or a professor or a friend, whoever it is in your life that you want to be more like them, people rarely change outside of relationship. They change because they want to be like somebody else, or because they're associated with somebody else that they learn from. So find people in your life that fit that role, and then approach those individuals and ask them to be your mentor.
Awesome. So Paul, I don't know if you're willing to share this, but I was just going to ask you, get a little more personal. What are some of your maybe professional goals that you have for this year? And would you mind sharing those with the listeners on the podcast?
Sure, not a problem, Nick. So before the call, Nick, you and I were visiting about kind of what's going on in the business right now, and I mentioned to you that I'm really transitioning more into the corporate environment, and so one of the goals is really to revamp and update and to create a new website. Just because the audience is different, we're going to be changing that. So one of my 90-day goals is to research other websites and to find designs I like, and then to connect with a designer and have that new website built out. The second goal is to create 2 new keynotes. So as I'm entering this new market and as I'm transitioning, I again want to be able to deliver more value. So 2 keynotes are on the list in this 90-day period. So I've completed one, and the second one is about halfway done. So I'm making some progress on that. And third, in terms of professional goal, and because this 90 days I'm really focusing on leadership in the Gen Y market, is to read 1 book a week, either on leadership or generational workforce challenges that will help me be one step closer to that goal, and to be able to provide more value to the clients.
And Paul, I'm a huge fan of reading. I spend at least 30 minutes to an hour every single day reading. And that's one thing we talk a lot on my website is different book recommendations. So I was wondering, do you have any specific book recommendations that would be great for our student leaders that are in college or high school?
Absolutely. Actually, this goes back to our FFA connection, Nick, and the author of this book is a man by the name of Mark Sanborn. His book is called "You Don't Need a Title to Be a Leader," and it's something that I wish I had in high school, and something that I wish I had through my years involved in student orgs, because it's truly a reminder that leadership is a behavior, and it's not a position, it's not a title, it's not a role. And so regardless if you have a title or not, you can make an impact and you can make a difference in the lives around you.
That's one of my favorite books. It's one that I constantly recommend. So thanks for giving another plug here.
Yeah, glad we're on the same page.
So you talk a lot about how workplaces can work with this Gen Y. So what should some of our Gen Y students be doing to help better integrate and really stand out to their future employers?
Absolutely. That's such a huge challenge right now. Companies are really struggling with how to recruit, retain, and motivate Gen Y employees, and how to sell in that market as well. And I think it's equally challenging for Gen Y and millennial students who are entering the workforce. So a couple of things I'll start with. The first that I encourage people in high school or college market right now is to focus more on the experience than on the title. I've mentored so many individuals who we have conversations and they say, well, Paul, I have these 2 job offers. I'd rather do this one, or I like this one a little bit more, but I think this other one has a better title, or the title sounds more powerful, or I think that if I go to this one, that one will look better on my resume so I could get a better job down the road. And then I always advise them, and I always ask them, what are they really seeking in this job? Is it to learn as much as they can? Is it to grow in new ways? Is it to be in a network where they can have new mentors and learn from their peers, or is it to simply have a fancy title on their resume? And so I think that's really one of the most important things that people in Gen Y can do is to really focus on the experience and not just on the title.
Oh, that's awesome. So do you have any maybe suggestions on how they can build some of the skills that they need in order to really stand out?
Absolutely. I think probably the first and most simple skill that they need is to be able to communicate. Communicate. It's something that regardless of what business, regardless of what industry you're in, you must know how to do. And so if you're able to communicate effectively, then you're going to have such a huge leg up on anybody else in the market. Nick, I know you through your conferences and through your trainings and through your ropes course experiences, you stress the importance of communication. And so anybody on this podcast already knows that that's important, but I just want to reinforce it. Put down the cell phone, quit sending a text message, get off Facebook, get off Twitter, and have a conversation. If when you start working for a company, you're able to actually connect with your boss, connect with your mentor, connect with your peers on a personal level, and they don't turn around every 5 minutes and see you on that phone or see you sending a tweet or talking about a new hashtag, then that's going to surprise them. And it may seem like something very small, but it's so important in the long run. The second thing I want to talk about is to find a way to remain focused. I tell people be focused, and it's going to change your ability to be effective in the market. And it sounds like such a simple thing. I just have to be focused, and it's going to revolutionize my ability to get a job, or my ability to be effective or impact others. And it's really true. The University of Michigan came out with a study not too long ago that they found that people in the workplace are distracted every 11 minutes, and it takes them 25 minutes to regain their focus. What they later found is that people are so connected to technology and so connected to their iPhone or to Twitter and to MySpace or Facebook or whatever social media platform they're using, that it's hard for them to really focus on their work. So don't think multitasking is the way to go. Just narrow in your focus on what needs to be done and get the job done. And that's going to really make a huge impression on employers and on business people when you enter the market.
Oh, that's an excellent suggestion, and one I strongly recommend quite often here on the podcast. Just that ability to focus is so key. Do you have any suggestions for our listeners on how they can actually start, because those distractions are there all the time. How can they start drowning out some of those distractions and really start focusing on that key work?
Well, earlier you asked me for a book recommendation, and I told you the book that I think has changed my life in so many ways. You don't need a title to be a leader. And in that book, Mark Sanborn talks about MVPs. Now, most people think MVP stands for most valuable player. They think of it as a sports term, but he uses it in a different way, and he calls it your most valuable and profitable activities. And what he encourages people to do, and I certainly will reinforce this because this has done wonders in my life, and I think it can do the same for your listeners, is he encourages people to narrow down their 6 to 8 most valuable and profitable activities, and then spend 60 to 80% of their time daily focusing on those 6 to 8 tasks. So if you have something that you're doing on a daily basis that doesn't fall into those 6 to 8 most valuable and profitable activities, then eliminate it. I know, sending out a tweet once every hour may seem like it's so important in your daily life, but if it's not adding value to your life, or it's not profitable in any way, or not, helping you become a better leader, then maybe it's time to rethink that. Maybe it's time to eliminate it. If you have something else that's equally distracting, then do the same. I would just encourage your listeners to, after they finish, pause this podcast right now. Press pause on it if you can, and write down your 6 to 8 most valuable and profitable activities. And then make another list of everything that you do on a daily basis that doesn't fall into that, and start eliminating it. Or at least start decreasing the time you spend on it. If you're spending 60 to 80% on your MVPs, you still have a little bit of time to do the other things, but those other unimportant tasks then won't cut into your critical time to be able to accomplish what you need.
Oh, that's an excellent suggestion. I love that. The MVPs, it's something that I try to do quite often. I've never actually phrased it that way, but I love that concept. Paul, we're getting close to running out of time here, but I wanted to ask you one final question before we go. But first, can you tell our listeners, if they want to learn more about you, maybe bring you to their college campus, how can they get a hold of you?
Absolutely, Nick. Anybody who wants to connect with me, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook. You can just look up Paul Moya, and you'll find me on both of those platforms. In addition, if you want more information on the programs that I deliver, or if you want to share this with somebody at your college campus or somebody at your high school who books speakers, who books leadership presenters, then send them to my website. It's www.paulmoya.com. I have information on my speaking topics and free resources on that site. So be sure to send them there, and hopefully your listeners will connect with me on the social media platforms as well.
So Paul, what is one thing that you wish you would have known when you were in high school?
I think that when I think about this question, I wish I would have known that habits lead to results. And I mean, let me explain what I mean by that. I think that we have this conception that we can do something now But when we need to change it, we will. For instance, I have a friend who's in high school right now, somebody I mentor, who has terrible study habits. And I tell them all the time, you need to improve your study habits, or you need to set aside, X number of hours each night to study, even if you don't have homework that night, to review your notes or to review your readings. And they say, well, Paul, I'm getting good grades without doing that. Why would I do that? And the reason I say is because one day you're going to hit a point where you can't just get by listening to the lectures without doing your reading or without reviewing your notes. And likely that day is going to come when you get to college, or maybe when you take a more difficult class in high school. Or if you're a college listener right now and you haven't hit that point, then maybe you haven't, hit the level of your college experience where you're taking the classes that you're just not able to succeed without putting in the hours. And he always says, well, Paul, when that day comes, I'll change it. But if it's not broke, don't fix it. And I think that mindset is dangerous, because to think that, oh yeah, well, when that day comes, I'll just change it automatically, and you'll just be able to flip a switch and have better study habits or have better habits altogether, is it's irrational in some ways, because we aren't able to just change overnight. Habits take time, and once they're developed in a certain way, it's hard to break them. So what I wish I knew is just the simple thought of developing better habits right here, right now. Don't wait until tomorrow. Don't think you'll change when change is necessary, because likely you won't. If you know something is a habit that you're going to need in the long run, start practicing it right now, whether it's writing down goals, whether it's using a to-do list. Even if you only have 2 things that you need to put on your to-do list right now, in not too long in the future, you may have 10 or you may have 15 things every day on that to-do list. Start getting in the habit right now. Positive habits lead to positive results.
Habits lead to results. I think that's the perfect point to end this episode of the podcast on. So, Paul, I want to thank you so much for joining us for this episode. It's been an awesome one.
Nick, thanks so much for having me. Good to connect with you, bud, and I look forward to seeing your work continue to develop.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I certainly hope you were taking notes for that interview. Paul gave us some great takeaways in this interview, and I just wanted to highlight a few of them and make one of them your big Take Action Challenge. And that Take Action Challenge is to actually go out and create your 90-day goals. Sit down and write 3 personal goals, your 3 professional goals, and make sure that those professional goals have an accountability person with each of and every single one of them. Like Paul mentioned, it could be the same person, it could be a different person, but someone who is going to hold you accountable to those specific goals. And when we say professional goals, those can be your goals as an officer, or your goals in your personal development kind of area, something that you are need to get some accountability held to, whereas your personal goals are more just for you. Those are things that you just want to individually work on, and you don't need to necessarily share those with other people. But for your professional goals, whether it be school or as a student officer, student athlete, whatever it may be, pick something and make sure you get some accountability for those goals. And also, at the end of the 90 days, make sure you evaluate those goals, what your progress was on them, and start setting another set of 90-day goals. This is actually the perfect time here in the first part of December to actually be setting these goals, because it's going to get you a good jump on the start of the brand new year. It's, kind of a natural cycle here where you can get that jump on the year, and then next quarter you can reset your goals, create new ones. It'll work out great. So I strongly encourage you, sit down, spend, an hour, get some of these goals planned out. Make your steps along the way as well. Do a little bit of reverse planning like we mentioned in that interview, but really commit to these and you'll see amazing, amazing results. So that is your Take Action Challenge for this week. And now we're going to jump into a brand new segment of the podcast. We had our first one last week, but this is the tip of the week. And this week, I want to really focus in on an app that has really helped me be more productive. And this is not just an app, it's also a website. So even if you don't have a smartphone, you can use this feature. But it's something that has really helped me get more done. And it's something I've been talking about before. I've used this quite a bit, actually, here the last probably 3 months or so. And that is called Focus at Will. And you can find it at focusatwill.com. And like I said, they have an app for iPhone, iPads. I'm not sure if they have anything for Android or any other phones out there, but I strongly suggest you go check this out. What is Focus at Will? It is basically a music playlist, but has been kind of scientifically designed to help keep you focused. And the way I use this is I actually set it specifically for my 50-10-50 blocks. So I set it for 50 minutes, and I listen to have this music playing in the background, and it's music that's scientifically designed to help you concentrate better. I really like listening to the focus spa. It's one of the challenges there. So I definitely encourage you to go check this out. I think it's something that you're going to find very useful, especially when you need to sit down and do some major focus, brain-intensive type work. It's something that's really helped boost my productivity and that I use almost every single day, multiple times a day, in fact. So go check it out, focusatwill.com. And as we're getting ready to wrap up this episode of the podcast, I have just a couple special announcements for you. The first is just a couple weeks ago, I redesigned my speaking page to make it easier for event planners to find out all the information that they need. So I strongly encourage you to check that out. You can find it at nickpalkowski.com/speaking, or just go to the show notes, which can be found at nickpalkowski.com/027. And there we'll have all the resources that are mentioned in the podcast, the Focus at Will, as well as all the links to Paul's website and all of his information as well. Next week on the podcast, we're going to be discussing the topic of gratitude, how you can use gratitude to lead. So be sure to come back next week to check out and hear on that topic. And finally, if you have a question at all about leadership, about being a student leader, I strongly encourage you to go to the show notes and submit your question. I'll be happy to answer those at the end of the podcast in the future. So until next time, go out and take action.
On another edition of the Ninja Leaders Podcast.